You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Brendan, Patrick. Hope you had a good Christmas break. Last podcast of the year. How's you reflecting back on 2022 at this point, making some resolutions for 2023?
Yeah, honestly, I actually didn't even consider making resolutions. Maybe that's like because it's not a Christmas thing, but when you said that was the first time that thought actually entered my brain this year. Reflecting back, in this pod a little bit, but outside of that, I had a pretty tame Christmas. It was very low key. I just was with my parents. My brother was there. He just graduated. And then him and I ran a half marathon on Christmas Day, which was fun. But outside of that, I don't know. The holiday, it's weird. Holidays like Christmas are interesting as you get older. They sort of change in meaning and execution.
Yeah, I mean, they just mean, I feel like if you have a tight family, but maybe you don't have children, then when you're around sort of our age, it's like, it's days off. It's time to relax and recharge and spend time with the friends and family that are around. And that is nice. I did similar, which is great. But I was just thinking,
marathon too?
I didn't run a half marathon. I ran a half 2 bottles of wine though. Does that count? No, I'm kidding. I was thinking though, New Year's resolutions, Brendan, if you don't make them, you can't break them. You know what I'm saying? But we will be making some in this pod because this is episode 90 of Arsenal Pass, where we are doing some reflections on Flesh and Blood in 2022, as well as some non-Flesh and Blood related things. But we will be looking to all things that have happened this year, from events to, amazing games, amazing achievements, and sets that have come out this year, plus some things that we're excited for in 2023. We're going to talk about some of our big learnings from events this year, some of the things that we feel like we want to continue to build on and learn on in 2023, and just shoot the breeze, Brendan. Well, not really. I was going to ask you about your Christmas, but you already did it, so that's kind of last week in Flesh and Blood. Well, I'm assuming you didn't play any Flesh and Blood.
No, but my knee is getting better, which is nice. So it was just IT band up and rolling out every day. And now it does bother me, but it bothers me at like mile 5 and then a little bit like mile 9. It's honestly my biggest limiter at this point, but it's not doing what it was doing like a week ago where I like couldn't run the day after or stuff. So it's very good news for me. I was like, when that creeped up, I was like, gosh dang it. So I'm happy about that.
It's a Christmas miracle.
Yeah. Honestly, my Christmas miracle was hitting Infinite and Marvel Snap finally. Jesus Christ. It was it was a rough season. Yeah. It was funny. Little anecdote here. I know we're talking Flesh and Blood, but this is just a funny story of like how my psychology works with Marvel Snap. I've been playing it for quite a while this season, and I had a bit of a rough time, like turbo to rank 90, and then was really struggling from there. And it's honestly just because I was being an idiot. I hopped on with Sasha. He barely knows anything about Marvel Snap, and I just talked it out with him, and we hit Infinite in like 2 days. Because I just slowed down, actually talked out my plays and stopped like monkey snapping people. It's like, yeah, it was easy.
I thought you had to immediately snap. I thought that was the game.
Dude, Sasha was like, he was like outside perspective, just observing my losing psychology on Marvel Snap, and it's pretty funny. Like, no reflection, just like insta-Q. It's just freaky.
Yeah. Love it. Likewise, no Flesh and Blood really this week. Just, it's holiday week, like you say, so enjoying the weather, enjoying time with friends and family. But let's get into some news, Brendan. We have our first spoiler for Outsiders. We have Assassin in the set. I don't think necessarily a massive surprise, but I guess the first card we do see comes in the form of. Did you hear how this got previewed? How this got spoiled? It was like, so there was an article that came out on LSS website, and then there was a hyperlink and an apostrophe at the end of a sentence, and if you clicked on it, it took you to the card. So I think it took someone like literally an hour to find it. But now we have our first preview card, which is a Ranger attack reaction. So a lot of speculation going on about what that means we will see for this set. Are we going to see a fully non-talented set? Are we going to see the 4 heroes that were in the shitty Christmas present art, which includes Dash, Azalea, Arachne, and Lena, the Alchemist? Brendan, I've heard that you'd be pretty excited if we got Alchemist.
Yeah, just give me the Alchemist. I don't care about any of the others. The Assassin though is good news. Like I feel like that class in its current state, from Dynasty is it just feels like old school Prism, where it's just like, okay, if we just had a few more pieces here, this deck would be a bit, it might be broken. Yeah, I don't know about broken. I don't know about that level Prism, but it might just be more fun, and you might be able to play the deck a bit more dynamically. So I'm excited for Assassin in terms of that. But yeah, the Alchemist would be quite exciting. Yeah, it's just like, because you think about Alchemist, you think about potions, right? And you think about potions, you think about permanence on the board, and that stuff is always fun.
We have a lot of potions that are currently being unused from Everfest, so maybe that could provide some opportunities for Class Constructed or Blitz to see some of those being used. Perhaps.
I burned it all as firewood this winter, so I'll have to buy some new ones.
You're not using them to throw at the wall?
Mm-mm.
No, okay, fair enough. Well, yeah, so a lot of, I guess we'll find out more as we head into Outsiders preview season. I mean, it's not actually really that far away. We have January with ProQuest season. February leads us into a couple of callings, but by the time we get into end of Feb, we're into preview season. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what we get. I think with Assassin, the one concern I've had about Assassin with Limited, and the reason I guessed it was in a supplemental set, is like that ability that we see on Arachne and some of the Assassin cards and the way they work with contracts and banishing cards doesn't feel like a particular sort of archetype that you want to see in Limited. So that's really interesting. But yeah, immediately it already gives me Arcane Rising vibes. I don't know about you. Everyone's favorite Limited set.
In terms of like how bad it will be?
No, I think just seeing the first preview card, it being an Assassin card, it being a card from the pits, it just reminds me of Arcane Rising. Yeah.
He scared me, dude. Yeah, so Arcane Rising is bad because there's no weapons and there's some OP cards. I think people complain a little bit too much about Induction Chamber for how much it shows up. But yeah, dude, that sealed format is honestly miserable.
Yeah, it sucks. But it's not even Induction Chamber is whatever. It's just a boring, that Arcane Rising was a boring limited format. The draft was okay, but the sealed format is just like, here's my 40
pile.
Yeah, here's my 40 card Viscerai pile, and you can even have like a really solid Azalea deck and still just be so hard to win games. I wouldn't mind revisiting Arcane Rising, potentially doing a draft or a sealed now that we're down the road with the game in terms of player skill and ability. I'd love to see, even just myself would love to revisit it. Maybe we can do some Arcane Rising sealed. Brendan, we haven't played a game in a while. Maybe we could, why not play Arcane Rising sealed? That'll make us feel really good about ourselves.
So I played an Arcane Rising draft, the team draft in Columbus, Ohio. When I was there. Yeah, and I don't know why they picked Arcane Rising. I think it's because they hadn't played it. But I think we opened more packs than we should have. That's the main thing I remember. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, oh, I thought it was supposed to be like this amount of packs. Like, no, it's more fun this way. I was like, okay. And of course, I was the only one drafting Wizard, and I had this like a freaking constructed deck. It was fun.
Did you also draft all of the equipment? I hate draft the equipment for people.
Well, I actually did pass an Induction Chamber to the other team, and that
your team would have been pissed.
They were, yeah. Flake was on my team, and that my team got destroyed by that Induction Chamber. Luckily, I was able to burn it out on Wizard, but yeah.
So, what was your team's record?
I don't know. We won by
either
we tied or we won by one game. I can't remember. I was a little inebriated, to be honest.
This is why I don't want Brendan on my team, though. He passes Induction Chambers to his opponents.
I forgot I was team drafting, to be honest. As soon as I passed it, I was like, ooh.
Yeah. So Racer's Edge. This is the Assassin Attack reaction. I didn't actually name the card. If you haven't seen it already, it says target attack action card with stealth gains +3. And it costs 0. This is a red that we're seeing. So I guess we don't know what stealth is at this point. Also speculation around stealth. Does it mean you can't block with attack actions? Does it mean that cards with certain power can't defend the cards? A lot of speculation about what stealth will be. We will see. I think it feels like something to do with attack actions, whether that be power or just you can't defend with attack actions, but we will see. Very exciting, Brendan. Moving on. Put out a guide to Kano this week, Brendan. Ultimate guide to Kano, as I'm calling it. It's for everything from beginner to advanced. Really go through the wildfire combo as well. A lot of the math cheat sheet is in there, Brendan, which I know you love for playing the Kano Wildfire combo, which you can go and check out. That is up now on Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. And there is also a full sideboard guide and deck guide that goes along with the deck tech that is in that video up on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. Do have a dash deck tech coming in the next week or so, about from the time this pod drops, early Jan. And I don't know, Brendan, anything else to say? I just want to say, as we get to this end of year, firstly, a massive thank you to all the Arsenal Pass listeners for your support this year. Everyone that we've met in events that's come up to us and thrown their support behind what we've done this year, the videos, deck techs, all the people who've come on and been guests for our deck techs and different videos that we've done over the years, or over the year rather, as well as all of the Arsenal Pass patrons. Just a big thank you. Brendan, anything you want to say before we move on to the Commander Cookout?
I echo the thank you. I mean, our channel, the Arsenal Pass sort of channel brand, whatever you want to call it, I mean, it saw a lot of growth in 2022, and I feel like it realized a lot of the growth as well because we were able to experience it in person at the Pro Tours. Orlando was pretty late in 2021, if I recall correctly as well, which is sort of your first exposure to, you know, people in the US. And yeah, it's just, it's awesome. And we're going to dig into it in this main topic, but it is quite a life experience we have been able to sort of have over 2022.
I've been listening to a lot of content people have been putting out, or reading a lot of content that people have been putting out for the end of year, and just when you look back at some of the things that happened in 2022, it's been an amazing year for Flesh and Blood, and like you say, we're going to dive into it, but it's so many things have happened this year. I can't believe that in January, you know, 12 months ago, less than 12 months ago, we didn't even have Everfest. We've gone through Everfest, we've gone through Uprising, we're now into Dynasty, we've had Pro Tours, World Championships, National Championships, ProQuest seasons, Road to National seasons, 2 skirmish seasons, I think, as well as, you know, 3 sets when all things are all said and done. So it's crazy to think that's happened over the course of 12 months. Cool. Let's move into the Command and Cookout section. We have a great question here from Joe. Joe emailed this in a little bit earlier in the year, actually, but I've just circled back around to it because I thought it was a great question and something that I've heard come up recently more again, sort of post-World Championship. So Joe says, I really enjoyed the recent episode with Michael Hamilton. This is now going back to, I think, like episode 70-something. And have been trying to start thinking more in terms of value about my plays. However, I love Dromai and find that she's a very difficult hero to apply that logic to. She has so many conditions that need to be fulfilled in playing and pitching reds. Valuing Ashe and Dragons also seems quite difficult. For example, what is my Kyloria really worth? I had to previously ensure a red is pitched to get the Ashe on the field, which changes the value decision with whatever that play was. Then whenever my opponent has a popper heavy deck or is not a factor, or how easily efficiently they can clear the next turn. I think you see the issue. How would you approach using value to guide a deck building with Dromai? I suppose this applies to other champs too, but seems very relevant in this case. The reason I picked this question, Brendan, is because I think Dromai is going to see a lot of play in ProQuest Season 3. I think it's a hero that is, I don't know if I was to put it right now, I might put it in the top 6 decks in the format. I think the way we're seeing Dromai being built now, a bit more aggressive slanted, a bit more tuned, removing some of the lesser needed dragons and just putting good cards into the deck has seen Dromai, I think, improve. And I think this is a good question. It's like, how do you value a dragon if you have to, you know, it's one card. Say it's like a Chromai, right? I know Joe uses a color example. It's like it's Chromai. Well, it's just one card for a dragon that has 3 attack, but there's an Ashe that goes into it. You know, there's these other things that go into it as well as a card that you've used. So I wanted to start by talking about what the value of an Ashe is. Like, in Brendan, what in your mind is the value of an Ashe token? Is it a full card? Is it half a card? Is it a quarter of a card? Do you have like a value you're trying to assign to Ashe, or is it just Ashe?
It's not just Ashe because you have to generate it, you know? Like, you have to keep that, like, the way you build your deck has to be sort of around Ashe, right? If you're using cards that utilize that to transform into it. So it's not nothing. It has a value, but the value is definitely not 1.
It's not a full card, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. So I would definitely, and this is a bit of a complicated topic, so I'm just riffing off the top. I would value it somewhere between 0.5 and below. Yeah,
I think you're right. So if we look at something like a sweeping blow, and you look at that creates an Ashe. So at 1 cost for 3 with Go Again, it gives you an Ashe, creates you an Ashe. So you're attaching, if you were to look at any other card that kind of has that text line, it would probably have 4 attack in a class. So that Ashe is worth about 1 damage. That's what you want to try and, I think, make your Ashe worth most of the time. So if you're pitching a red to play let's say you already have 1 Ashe in play and you pitch your red to play a 1 cost dragon or a Centipie or something. If you're pitching that red card so that you can just get the Ashe, that's a big, you've also done like 2 resources if it was a blue. for just that ash. So those are the things, I think, the ways you can weigh up your ash and what's it's worth. It could be worth, often it could be worth 2 resources. It can be worth about a point of damage. It can be worth somewhere around just under half a card, like Brendan says, is what it seems to be that an ash is worth when it comes to Joe's question. So if you're looking at how do you use this kind of value approach that players like Hamilton and a lot more players are using in this kind of more modern era of deck building when it comes to getting the most out of their turn cycles and their deck building in general, I think you have to understand, well, if I want to play a card like Kyloria, I want to make that card cost as little as possible to get the most value out of it. So if you're able to make consistently that ash be worth a point of damage, less than half a card, maybe max a resource or two, I think you're going to be able to say that your Kyloria, to be able to play it, is worth about a card and a half, just based on what we just talked about. And I think if you can get your, what is Kyloria? It's a 1 for 4, right? It has two defense and has an on-hit effect. And if you get to come in with that on the first turn that you play it, and it be a relevant on-hit effect, because you don't have, a card in hand already that you want to arsenal, then that's a pretty good, a card and a half for 4 damage and a card is a pretty good rate of return, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or an energy potion. Maybe you steal an energy potion.
Yeah. I feel like when we've had conversations with Michael Hamilton about the way he looks at value and looks at cards in Flesh and Blood, he usually doesn't pay too much attention to like that kind of nuance, right? I feel like he looks at it in a much more simplistic way, because we've had that convo with him in terms of like looking at Wizard. Because if you look at all of Wizard cards, they're underrated. But how do you value Aether Wildfire? How do you value the on-hit effect of Aether Spindle? And from what I understand, when we talk to Michael, is that he doesn't value them.
Well, he looks at realized. He looks at realized effects, right? Realized damage.
Exactly, yeah. So like the opt, turboing through the deck, right? Drawing with tomes, like, just seeing more cards. It's like that nuance usually doesn't make it in. But I think it's important.
I agree.
But yeah, I think that's why but to get back to the main point, if you're listening to the episode with Michael Hamilton and you're like, oh, how does this apply to Kyloria, making ash, having red cards, having go again, this permanence on the board and poppers, usually, from what I understand, Michael doesn't really factor that stuff in. He just looks at kind of the raw value of the card.
Yeah, but so the go again, for instance, is raw value. So you can. Mm-hmm. The problem is you can't. There's no arbitrary value you can assign to these. That you can't say an ash is worth exactly half a card, or it's worth exactly 1 point of damage, or it's worth exactly 2 resources, because it's contextual on how that ash is created. But what you can do is you can think about, well, what is the most common way that I create an ash? And if the most common way you create an ash is through incidental value, like if it's off a sweeping blow, it's off pitching a red when you don't need any more resources in your turn. So if you pitch a red card and you only need 1 resource to do all the damage that your hand can do anyway, then you haven't lost value on that, right? You've gotten that ash for some pretty good value. So let's say your hand is like, I don't know, just simplistically, 2 Chromai, a Kyloria, and a red card that doesn't matter. And you already have 2 or 3 ash in play. If you play that hand out and use that red card to pitch for the Kyloria, then you haven't lost value on that hand. But if you used a blue, say that card was a blue, well, you've made this ash, but there's 2 resources sitting here that aren't doing anything for whatever reason, or maybe that red card was a friggin' 3rd Chromai, and you've had 3 or 4 ash, and now you've lost the ability to play that 3rd Chromai. There is reasons where you will lose value, but it's contextual, and that's why I say I think you can try and maybe just kind of assign a value to that ash based on what your deck is doing. If you are trying to assign a value, which I think is important for understanding how good Kyloria is, because if it's actually costing you, if your ash costs you a card every single time to make an ash because you're pitching a red and then you have to pitch another card just to play out your hand because your deck is full of, like, I don't know, Embermore Centipires, for instance, and you're paying a full card just to be able to create that ash, then your Kyloria is now costing you 3 cards. It's costing you the card to pitch for it, it's costing you the Kyloria itself, and it's costing you the card that you had to use to create an ash. Now Kyloria all of a sudden doesn't look worth it, right? Whereas if your Kyloria is costing you, 1 damage from your sweeping blow, so less than half a card, you're using the extra 2 resources off a blue you pitched to actually play the Kyloria, plus the Kyloria, well, yeah, you're like a card and a little bit for Kyloria sounds like a much better trade. So I think, Joe, and to answer anyone who's looking at kind of the value of Dromai cards, you want to get your ash as cheap as possible, and you want to understand, based on what your deck is doing, how much that ash is really costing you, probably on average.
Mm-hmm.
Probably going to see you.
I think the sweeping blow example is a good example for like how that translates into like the realized value of the ash into Kyloria.
Pitch value is harder because How often should you be pitching? Yeah, it's like
what's even harder than that? The opponent's poppers, like an expected poppers in the opponent. I don't even think that's factored in, right? It's just like that's where you get out of the realm of value and you look at sort of game plans, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm playing against a Guardian that has all poppers, well, maybe now I'm setting up a Ghostly Touch with my Time to Tap Potion and my whatever the one that clears Phantasm, Semblance, or the other, or the permanent, or that you can put on the battlefield. So
Pierce Reality.
That's not a vet yet. Pierce Reality, I think, is the +2.
It's the other one,
maybe. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's not a very oriented way of looking at the game. It's like, I know that the only way I can win this game is like with the sequence of cards. And I think that Flesh and Blood just boils down to that sometimes when you get into the sort of more complicated matchups like that.
Yeah. So one thing I think you can do, I just wanted to answer Joe's question about poppers, because you were saying you're probably not valuing them as a game plan thing. I think that's mostly true. I think if you know that your opponent has a popper, so whether that's you're playing against a deck that is like Guardian, just has infinite amount of poppers, or Brute, or you know that your opponent has one in hand for whatever reason, say against a Runeblade, when you play out your dragon, you don't have to attack with the dragon, right? You don't have to attack with the dragon. But if you do, what you're saying is, okay, I'm offering a trade to my opponent for my dragon for their popper. And then that's the value of your dragon at that point. You're valuing it at one card from your opponent's hand, and you have to understand how good that card is from your opponent's hand. If it's, you're trading it for a Runic Reclamation against a Runeblade, and you have a blue aura on the field, that might be a really good trade for you, for instance. Whereas if you're trading it for the Brute's worst card in hand, which is a yellow Smash Instinct, which they don't really need to do any damage on their turn, well, it's a pretty bad trade for you, right? So it can be contextual again on what the value of it is, but it all comes down to, while the value of Ash and the value of dragons when you play them, a lot of the time comes down to the value of what you're doing. On the opposite side, the value of your dragons when it comes to poppers, it's all about the value of your opponent's side. What's the value of that popper in their hand if they're going to actually defend with it? Sometimes the decision is, well, if I get the popper out of their hand, it's worth way more damage than if I just didn't lose my dragon here. So that's kind of how I would look at it. But I do think when you're playing against heavy popper decks, like Brendan's saying, it's more about what your actual game plan is. And I think you're in sort of inbuilt value of Dromai and your dragons. You've already gone and done all that work with your deck building. Now you've just got to come up with the right game plan to make sure you can leverage those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one because we're talking about trying to assign the value to the individual card. I also think when it comes to permanents and things like dragons on the field, you can look at the sort of expected and average value over a series of turns, right? Because that Kyloria sits there for 2 to 3 turns, you attack, you expect to attack twice with it, the value of the card goes significantly up. So it's like, what's sort of my floor and what's my ceiling with this card?
Yep.
And yeah.
Well, what's the average? I think is the question you need to answer. In an average game against what I'm expecting to play in the field, what is my Kyloria worth on average? Or in any given matchup, what's it worth on average? This is the tough thing about my kind of problem I have with everyone sort of defaulting to this sort of value-orientated thinking when it comes to deck building and gameplay, is that the average value of a card is actually the most important, and that can vary wildly, but also opportunity cost isn't considered in this. So let's use an example, right? Sweeping Blow creates this Ash that allows you to play Kyloria, but that's almost a deck building restraint that you've had to put Sweeping Blow into your deck. Like, if you didn't have to care about Ash, would you want to play a 1 for 3 that is Go Again? No, right? You look at other cards that could potentially be in that slot. So there's also opportunity cost to playing a card like Sweeping Blow. Maybe you have to play yellows because you really need to make Ash in your deck, or blue, or whatever. That card's kind of bad, right? Just on its own, but what it does is enables another card. So you have to look at opportunity cost, which I think we don't really do. And we talk about this kind of value-orientated way of deck building and playing in Flesh and Blood, but it is there. And it gets more complicated with a deck like Dromai that has more opportunity cost. Like Michael Hamilton talks a lot about it with Icelander, right? Where it's like, well, Icelander's cards are kind of, wizard cards, like you say, below rate. But when you're looking at a card like Wounded Bull, for instance, that's really easy to evaluate. It's like 2 cards for 7 or 8, and the opportunity cost of those cards is probably always going to be lower because of what Wizard is. But when it comes to something like Dromai or these other decks that have a lot more sort of interconnected things with their cards and rely on their cards for different things, it becomes a lot more difficult to make this equation. So Dromai is probably the hardest to do this with.
Yes. There's another funny one. Food for thought. Like, you talked about, the importance of the average, right? The average expected value of the card. Well, Aether Wildfire is a card where the average is irrelevant. So there's the floor, right? Which is when you Crucible plus Aether Wildfire in your main phase because you have redundant copies, or maybe that's like going to win you the game because your opponent does have Arcane Barrier. But the average is actually irrelevant in that card. And the floor is kind of too, because the only thing that matters is the ceiling, because the deck only operates off of getting the ceiling out of Aether Wildfire, pretty much.
It's funny. I would disagree with that, because I would say that you have an expected value of what your combo is going to do. So if you know that the baseline of your Wildfire combo with Lessons in Lava is 26, right? But you know that you can make that 36 pretty consistently with Tunic Counter, right? You're like, I know I can pretty consistently make this 36 or 31, as I think is more average, right? But in any given matchup, I expect my opponent to have X amount of Arcane Barrier available in that turn. You can assign an average value of that Wildfire, I think. Like, I don't think... I get what you're saying, like, in terms of it's the win condition. It's all that this deck is particularly about. But I do think you can still give it... So, for instance, I think Wildfire is worth a lot more in a matchup against aggressive decks than it is against a deck like a slower Guardian deck, for instance.
Average values.
Yeah,
yeah. I'm here. I hear what you say. I think you might be right too.
I think you're right as well, though.
I know. Yeah, it's so funny. That's the thing is, we've talked with Michael about this many times. Like, I've had private conversations with him too at tournaments, like all the time, because these things come to, like, this happens all the time. It's like, okay, Michael, your way of thinking about this is obviously, like, almost objectively correct, right? Like, it works perfectly with what you're doing with Icelander, what you're doing with Oldhim. Okay, but how does this apply to Kano? And it's like, well, it doesn't. It just kind of doesn't. And Dromai is a bit similar because of the permanence on the board and, like, how long do they stay? Yeah, it just gets a bit funky. But let me just say I empathize with where you got confused with, like, applying it to Dromai, because
it's not easy.
Yeah, it's tough.
The other thing as well is I think a lot of players who have been around Flesh and Blood longer have inherently done this when they've built decks. I think it's just been an inherent thing of, like, what is the value of your average hand in a game? What is the value of the sort of average card in your deck when you draw it? I think this was kind of inherently done because Welcome to Wraith was so value orientated, to be honest. Like, you had to be, because there just wasn't enough damage in the game. There was so much fatigue happening in that match, in those matches, because or games going to, like, second, third, fourth cycle, because there just wasn't as much damage. There wasn't as much explosivity of 5 cards. As the game has grown and matured, we've moved to these sets that have been a lot more about 5-card hands and big bursts of damage and aggressive sort of decks that are above rate. And so I think people's thinking moved away from this value, this value kind of understanding when they're deck building, to just, like, what is a card, like, how much damage do these cards do when they're in my hand? Which is fine, but this is we could go down a rabbit hole here.
It's such a ramble too, because, like, so I was a part of creating the fatigue deck that dominated that format, and I will tell you right now that it was the sort of philosophy that went behind it was not a Michael Hamilton way of looking at the game, like an individual card evaluation on value. It was actually just a synergistic way, which is not what the deck is doing. The deck is outvaluing the opponent, but it was like a synergistic thing. It's like, okay, we came from the perspective of, like, if I block with my recursive red card and Drone of Brutality, or, like, my crappy blue cards, and I trade them for your red cards, if we go through, an hour of gameplay, you run out of good cards, and I keep this Drone of Brutality in my deck forever, and now I have a good card, and then you don't. We didn't even think about it like that, except for Flick Flack. Flick Flack is freaking ridiculous. And you look at the expected value of Flick Flack when your deck is all blue combo cards, you're like, oh my god. Anyway, we should go to the main topic. Jeez. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, last thing I was gonna say on that was I think the reason that Drone was so strong, and that you already looked at it that way, though, you go, well, it defends for 2, but it inherently recurs. My opponent on average is getting 3 to 3.5 damage out of a red, which is what was happening in that set. Like, getting more than, like, 3.5 damage. That's why defense reactions are so strong. But yeah, anyway, great question, Joe. We could go on this topic for ages. I think my last parting words on this topic are, when it comes to the average value of cards, I think it's pretty simplified right now in the way it's looked at, but I think if you're doing any kind of deck building, you should be trying to understand what the average value of your card is, even if it's at a base level, to understand what you're actually getting value-wise out of this card, because I think it leads to just better deck building, just tighter deck building, and cards that probably shouldn't be in your deck are not going to be in there, because you're going to go, oh, base level, like, this card isn't worth it, and you're going to be able to identify it pretty quickly.
Yeah, you'll be able to look at your Yellow Wisp of the Oracle and be like, maybe that wasn't a good choice for the Pro Tour.
Shout out to Z-Bun. If you do want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, you can do so at arsenalpass@gmail.com. You can drop them in the comments below on YouTube. You can tweet at us, DM us, whatever you want to do to get your questions. And we definitely have some spots for some questions in 2023 on the Commander Cookout. Brendan, like you say, main topic of the pod, 2022, Flesh and Blood, a year in review. This week's pod is all about diving into some of our favorite memories from this past year, our biggest learnings, our moments of growth, what we're taking away from our year in competitive pro Flesh and Blood, our goals and focuses for next year, and things we want to improve on and plan to get better at. There's some cool sort of, I think, takeaways from this. But first of all, Brendan, we're going to start. We're going to start with the fun stuff. So I'm just going to fire some questions at you, and then we're both going to kind of throw our answers out there, maybe discuss a little bit, reminisce, whatever comes of it. What's your favorite event? What was your favorite event of 2022, and why?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's Pro Tour number 1. Nothing else, just, I don't know. All the other events didn't sort of capture the same energy. Pro Tour number 1 was just really special. Maybe that was just for me. It was more of like my individual viewpoint, but being able to come together with players from all over the world that we had been hearing about for a long time. You know, there was all these narratives going into it. I was seeing my friends from, Hayden, Dale, Sasha, all these people came together for this singular tournament, and it, like, I don't know, the energy was just electric, and I was very happy to have brought Kano to that tournament. I feel like it was a big stretch for us at that time. We had the thought of wanting to, like, me and Sasha back in 2019 were, we would talk for fun about bringing, or it's actually like 2020 because Arcane Rest didn't come out. We would talk for fun about bringing Kano to like a pro tour. Like, oh, this class is so funky. Let's bring it to the first pro tour. This is before they even announced it. Like, it was just such a pipe dream. And I feel like we really, really worked hard on that deck, and it felt good to bring it to the tournament and put a player in top 8 with it. Cause I don't think it was on almost nobody's radar except for maybe Alexander 4.
Yeah, I wonder how I'd feel about PT1 if I ended up playing Dash, which is the deck that I had tested and bought with me. I really liked my Dashes. I mean, the Dashes that I had at that time is now, I think, like the base of what people are doing with Dash. It's like, it's just maximum velocity, tick low pounded deck, and I think that's we see how powerful it is. It's one of the best decks in the format right now. But at the time against Stavo, yeah. Anyway, my favorite event of 2022 was also PT1. I think just all the things you said, but it felt so natural to have this event happen and to see just the way people reacted to it and what was happening in that venue and the way that the event went. I just got to Sunday of that event and thought, this is what Flesh and Blood is going to be. We're going to continue to see this for the foreseeable future. This isn't going anywhere. This is a success. This is the things that it was all meant to be, and it feels so right, if that makes sense. And it just had an amazing time, and I think it set the benchmark for what Pro Tours need to be moving forward, which we'll talk a little bit down further, but I think LSS may not have quite lived up to finish out the year, but I have hope for 2023, which we'll talk to. But
this is what Pro Tours are meant to be. Get smacked in the face by Lille, like, welcome to France.
Well, it was the best. PT1 was the best venue of the year. I don't think it was the best run event of the year. I actually think Lille, from like a round to round standpoint, was run better, but PT1 was done really, really well. It had the biggest calling at the time. It had, the calling was a nightmare at PT1 though. Just a little side note. Yeah,
it wasn't for us.
Capped.
Yeah, it was capped, and many people didn't actually get to play, from what I understand.
Yeah, over 100 people, I think. Most memorable game in 2022. Do you have a game that stands out to you as the game that you'll remember, good, bad, otherwise, in 2022?
Do you want to guess?
I just looked at the notes, so I saw it. So it would have been the game, I guess, though.
Yeah. So it was Indianapolis, Everfest meta, class constructed, top 8 winning in. I'm on Prism. D-Root is on Starvo. I probably would have bet the house at some point in that game that I was going to win that game. I knew that Awakening was the only out towards the end. I knew that he could only beat me with Awakening. I was playing towards that. And lo and behold, he does Awakening me, but then he natty draws the blink with the fuse. And I ended up losing that game. It's not what killed me. It was the Pulse of Volthaven the turn after, which really put me in a bad spot. But that game, for many reasons, was my most memorable game. Not because of the way it ended, surprisingly, even though, I maybe just recapped a bad beat on Arsenal Pass. But no, I mean, going into that match, I had actually had a pretty rough time in Flesh and Blood before Indianapolis. I had mono. It sucked. And I'd been performing really bad. Like that ProQuest season, I did not do well at all. And I mean, I would just go and like leave tournaments. I actually felt really ill because of the mono too. But that tournament, I practiced and I showed up and I felt very, very good playing it. So it just felt it was very reassuring to be able to get back into it. And I felt very good throughout that tournament. And that match was pretty important for me because, coming from Flesh and Blood being my first TCG, playing this 1-in at Indianapolis after going on this just crap streak, and I'm playing against Magic the Gathering Pro Tour champion, sitting next to Matt Rogers in the feature match. Like, there was just a lot of things going for me there, and it was just a cool experience, even though I lost. And I think I lost in a cool way as well.
Love losing in cool ways. I actually thought, for some reason, I thought that I just remember that Dallas top 8 was the end of 2021, but there was a great game on camera that you had in that event with Lexi, where you just dismantled some people with that Lexi deck from draft. But for me, I think my most memorable game in 2022, harking all the way back to January, was my Nationals final. An instant classic, being memorialized in a bit of a meme.
Yeah, the meme.
If you haven't seen it, I'll try and find the link and put it in the description. Someone made a full animated video about this final where I played against Ultim in the final of my Nationals. And I think memorable, not because of that game being obviously the final of Nationals and winning the event, but I was so friggin' nervous in that game. I've never been more nervous to play a game of Flesh and Blood in my life because I knew it was going to be a very, very atypical game. I knew what my opponent was likely going to do based on their deck being so defensive. I knew what I needed to do to win the game, but I'd only played that scenario out like once or twice in testing. So I was like so nervous to like stuff it up on camera. And I knew that it was going to be such an odd game to watch. And I knew it was going to be a game that would have really fine margins, even though the game looked like I should be winning by a massive amount. And it did. It came down to me comboing off, not killing my opponent, and then having to kill them the next turn, which was like 1 or 2 points of damage in it to be able to win the game. So my most memorable game of 2022, I think. So many games though. I mean, we played two Pro Tours, 3 Pro Tours on the side, multiple callings this year, Nationals, etc. So there's a lot of games to remember. Also, we've played some games versus each other. So I'm sure there's some games there that, all the ones I lost, I don't remember though. So I don't know.
That's like pretty much every match on camera, to be honest. It was pretty memorable. Pro Tour number 1, round 1. I'm on stream. I'm against freaking Boost Dash. What the hell are people doing with Boost Dash here?
Brian Kong, right?
Yeah, Brian Kong, which I got that one back in Lille, by the way. But yeah, I played a Sonic Boom and flipped an energy potion. I was like, what deck did I just bring to this?
Yeah, everyone in the comments going, Kano. What the funniest moment in Flesh and Blood in 2022?
Yeah, I think honestly, this is a hard one because there might be something I'm forgetting, but it was pretty funny when I was live at the World Championships and Flake. I was casting with Flake, and he's supposed to introduce the names and the people. That's like his role. He's like, "Hey, why don't you take it?" And I was like, "Okay, whatever." And then we go to that card with the player names, and they're two just a series of consonants, like Polish names, and I'm just like, oh, what the hell? You got this one, because I don't know if Flake is Polish but he has some sort of affinity to be able to pronounce Polish names, maybe because he did Gwent.
The Gwent connection, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But it was just like such a setup. Little dog.
Yeah, it was literally a mirror match between two Polish players, and you're like, remember that. All the Dante Del Fico moments, unfortunately, were in 2021. Otherwise, it would probably be some of them were at Worlds, which was great. There was a point at Worlds where I was filming Dante, and I said, Dante, how are you feeling? He said, don't put this on your video. My mom's gonna see this.
Oh yeah, his mom. I think. Wait, he was being serious. Though,
he was
right?
being serious. Yeah. But that's funny. We did a team draft at PT1, and that's some of the funnest games and the most enjoyable moments I've had of Flesh and Blood. Just the banter and seeing Brendan and Zach Bunn just throwing barbs at each other across the table, and all in good fun, obviously. But yeah, that was.
I think I blacked out during that one. I don't remember anything.
Yeah, that's because you 0-3'd, I think. Favorite non-fab activity to fab trip this year, Brendan?
Well, speaking of Mr. Bun. Yeah, my favorite non-fab activity was the many dinners and cocktails with the Wolfpack. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, ruin people's immersion on the rivalry, but yeah, we will often get dinner with them and sometimes partake in a few drinks.
Give 'em a little too.
It's just a great time. We literally do it every single time. It's awesome.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Singapore when I went to the calling. Got most of a week in Singapore, and that was probably my favorite non-fab activity this year. Was spending. That country is awesome. If you haven't been, Brendan, I don't think you've been before, but you should get there. It's a great country, great part of the world. Most hated card of 2022. We presented a Speedy Award for Flake for the most hated card in 2022, and we both were a bit vexed by it being Revel and Runeblood. So I thought I'd give you this opportunity, Brennan. Your most hated card of 2022, the card that caused you the pain, frustration, or just dominated a lot of your testing focus.
Well, Bravo, star of the show. Honorable mention to Aces of Spite, but Bravo star of the show was terrible game design. And what was really irritating about Bravo is that I felt like Legend Story Studios would not acknowledge that card was a mistake for the longest time. And it was just like so glaringly just disgusting. And they're like, yeah, you just, because at that time my friend Sasha was working there. He's like, what do you mean? You just fatigue it. And I was like, dude, shut up. Like, he's been saying this to me since Chain. He's like, yeah, you just fatigue it. I'm like, dude, yeah, terrible advice from that guy. But then they came back with yeah, well, in testing it lost a plunder run. And I'm just like, dude, come on.
Yeah, Lightning Briar and Plunder Run.
Tell me you didn't actually test the most obvious deck of Starvo without telling me you didn't test, because like obviously it wasn't tested, and it was just one of those decks that it was weird with the way it sort of interacted with Flesh and Blood, because it felt like you were winning the game in deck building rather than during the game, right? This idea of like drawing the cards and then revealing them. Nevertheless, I will say now in retrospect, Starvo might have actually been good for the game. But I hated that thing. I hated it. Yeah, I mean, the argument is that it was a good entry point for new players, and it gave people sort of a way to interact with the game that is exciting. If they weren't, playing with these very complicated, just hyper value decks like Icelander, right? Where if you're kind of a worse player, you just lose 100% of the time. So there's this argument where it's like, yeah, Starvo allows people to come in and actually enjoy Flesh and Blood and compete with people. They don't necessarily dominate because it's still a skill oriented deck. Like the Mirror was tough, but they do get to win some games. And Flesh and Blood is a game because of how it's based off that equation and how the cards are designed. You tend to lose if you're the worst player.
Yeah, I think all good points on Star of the Show. Mine is Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. That card just dominated so much of testing for Leal, and it was just a constant piece of frustration of like, oh, maybe this and this matchup can be Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. Just way too much value coming out of this turn. That card
yeah, hilarious, right? Hilarious. Oh well, I mean, in conjunction with Stubby Hammers as well. It was like, you could, if we want to talk, the Command Cookout question was about value. Calculate the value of a Fi's equipment that starts on the battlefield with Mask of the Pouncing Lynx and Stubby Hammers. It's freaking ridiculous. Like,
pretty good. Yeah.
Such an oversight on that one.
What about your most loved card of 2022? The card that just brought you the most joy?
I'll let you go first here.
Okay, well, it's two. I think we've got two sides of the same coin here, because mine is Lesson and Lava. Played a lot of Kano this year. I had a lot of good games with Kano, and the card that just kept standing out to me, a card that I've always liked but has just grown and grown and grown as a card that I think is powerful, I think is enjoyable, I think is well designed, is just Lesson and Lava. Part of obviously Wildfire combo, but also a card in its own right that I think is quite enjoyable to play with, leads to a lot of interesting play lines. But I kind of just honorable mention is Amulet of Earth, because we played a deck that was so reliant on Amulet of Earth at PT Leal, and I think it just epitomizes the way that our group as a whole likes to look at the game, and a card like Amulet of Earth was so crucial to what we did for a Pro Tour.
Fun fact about Amulet of Earth, you can put it on the battlefield and still 70% of players will not see it the turn after.
70% of your opponents, apparently.
Dude, it happens. It was happening. Oh my God. that is such an innocuous card, because if you don't play against a class constructed, you just like, it is so relevant as it sits on the battlefield and threatens actually so much.
It's pretty fun.
And people didn't have experience against it, so it was crazy. Yeah, I love Lesson in Lava. That's a fantastic card. With the agency it gives you over your deck and to manipulate it. Mine is going to have to be Wildfire, because I mean, that is the card of 2022, right? Like, I think if we had to summarize our year in a card, it would be Aether Wildfire.
Yep, I think that's a good call. Which hero do you think you spent the most hours playing in 2022?
It was Kano for me.
It's not even close, is it?
Nope.
I think Prism. You played a lot of Prism during the year as well, actually.
It's still not even close.
You played so much Kano.
Yeah, so much.
I think mine's Viscerai, actually. I actually think I ended up playing more time on Viscerai through testing, through events, etc. So it's pretty close. If you were to sum up your year in 2022, Flesh and Blood, including everything from the content we've done, your pro play, casting, just everything. You've got 3 words. What are your 3 words, Brendan?
I don't have 3 words. I just want to say
5 words. I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to do the things we do and live the lives that we do right now with Arsenal Pass, with Flesh and Blood. Like, it's pretty easy to not to take for granted the amount of purpose it gives me, and like, it's been absolutely life-changing and in a very much a positive way. So I don't think I could sum that into 3 words, but that is very much how I feel. And I just feel lucky to be able to do this stuff.
Agree. All right. Well, Brendan said it so well. I feel like I can't say anything. So let's move on to part 2. We've got the competitive event stuff. Do you think, my first question for you, Brendan, do you think Flesh and Blood achieved what was expected of it as a game in 2022?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You got to think about where it came from, right? Like, I think that, because I would say the quality of event kind of went like this a little bit, coming from PT1.
For audio listeners, Brendan's putting his hand slightly down.
Slightly down, yes. Yeah. I think that if you consider where we were in 2021 and 2020, it was a massive success.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think mostly I would say it fulfilled 85% of what was expected of it in this year, that's a resounding success, right? That's a big portion to achieve. I think if I had to say one thing that is a bit of a shortcoming, it would be on the kitchen table side of the game. I think products to market that are for players on the kitchen side of the game, players at the grassroots of the game, players learning this game. We had Classic Battles was the kind of premier product for that this year, and I think there's a bit of a miss, right? So I think that's a bit of something that needs to be addressed in the future. But everything else, OP, like you say, product releases for the most part for boosted releases, I think was.
Well, since you got to pick a bone, I've got a couple bones as well.
You're kidding.
I'll throw in there. Well, they could announce OP events sooner and give us more notice. This is beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, James has acknowledged that now, right?
Yeah.
Which is a win.
Also, the Dynasty release was bad. I know that it was out of their control, whatever that means. I don't know how much control they possibly could have had if they really wanted to make it happen. But releasing Dynasty after the World Championships during the holiday season and having Worlds not include Dynasty and be Uprising. I'm not saying that's because Uprising is bad, but it was a very still draft format at that time. I think that was bad, but I think that everybody thinks that was bad, and it was just something that happened because logistical issues, and we're not under the pretense of like, that was great, we're going to do it again. But I really wish that we could have gone into Worlds with Dynasty. It would have been awesome.
Yeah, agree. Me too. What was the best format or metagame of the year in 2022? In your opinion?
It's very hard to be objective on this topic because of Kano. Like, Kano is, it's a wild card, right? But I think that it is the world's class constructed meta. I thought that was a very healthy meta for a competitive player. Like, if you were playing at the World Championships, I think it's pretty close to an ideal class constructed format. Many things are viable. You could have played, one of the sort of replacement level top decks, or you could have played a hate deck and done very well. We saw Jeremiah in the top 8. We saw the Briars. Like,
Brian, I want to calling.
Yep. It was like, honestly, I think it's the best class constructed format, in my opinion, that Flesh and Blood has ever seen. The only thing I worry about is that it's just very skill intensive at this point. I think there's not a lot of variance. There's not a lot of this like prism BS, and which it's good for me, but maybe we'll see a change in the future.
Interesting. Yeah, I have like the complete opposite view. I think for the game, like you say, I think that was the best. I think as a player, it's got to be the first format we had at the start of this year, which is the Tales of Aria format, which I think was untimely ruined a little bit by the ban or the errata with Briar, which I wish kind of we didn't see to that extent. But I think that format, the Tales of Aria class constructed and draft format, the end of Nationals 2021 into the 2022 season was my favorite format, just from the ability. Just the play. I thought the gameplay was really interesting. I thought they were decks to target, and as much as I think it's healthy with the format we've just had recently, from a player standpoint, I found it a little bit less enjoyable than the format at the start of the year. But that's
yeah. I think you could definitely look at Tales of Aria and say that was a more enjoyable format.
Some people won't.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, at the beginning, there was a lot of people that had an issue with that format because it was just mono Cheerio Briar. But I could get behind that, right? Like I could say that was a more enjoyable format, but I would still probably stick with I think that Worlds was a better format.
Yeah, yep. Is Flesh and Blood seen as a one-format game due to the issues and complaints we see with both Blitz and Limited, and the fact that this year we had a release of just one draftable set?
Well, I think that Blitz gets a worse rap than it deserves. I'm not saying that it doesn't deserve any criticism, but people are pretty rough on it, and I think that there was, at least in the Blitz format that was at the World Championships, there was a lot of competitive integrity in that format. You could get juiced. That's just how it works. But if you look at any other popular card game that people enjoy, like there's so much more of those BS games. And we've got a few of them, and they come at an opportunity cost. The players playing those decks. I would say that Limited this year was really bad for me, which I hate to sound too critical, but Uprising staying around for as long as it did completely sucked the joy out of Limited for me this year. Like, I didn't like it at all. And I liked it in the beginning. Like, I'm not saying that Uprising, I'm not getting on the bandwagon of saying Uprising was a terrible draft format, you can only force fi, all this. No, I'm just saying that I didn't particularly enjoy that format because of how narrow it was. I felt like it was pretty narrow. I really liked Tales of Aria for the different archetypes and stuff. I feel like that had more depth. And yeah, just being stuck with that for a very, very long time, didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. It's the how long we spent with Uprising. I actually think the reason I asked this question is because I think it is a little bit pegged as class constructed as the only way to play Flesh and Blood properly or purely, and I think that's an issue. One, because I think from a competitive standpoint that shouldn't be the case. I think Blitz might have its issues, but I think that format needs to be used in a competitive standpoint in some way, shape, or form. I think Limited definitely needs to be. I think Limited needs to be a massive part of this game at a competitive level because that drops down to at a more casual and armory level where draft is a great format and it should be one that and sealed and one that should be able to be used at a store level frequently. It's great for stores to move product. It's great to have people opening cards and product and getting them in their hands, and it's a good way to introduce people to the game. And I think without that, we kind of the game's going to struggle a bit. So I think there's something that needs to be looked at. I hope that it looks like we're getting 2 limited sets this year. I hope that they're great limited formats. I liked Uprising, but we spent way too long with it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Outsiders. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing what I think is an idea right now is that we're seeing a lot of class constructed. That is what Flesh and Blood is, and that's the pure form of Flesh and Blood. But there is so much more to that. There's Blitz, there's Limited, there's UPF. Maybe even we see more support for a format like Clash. I think it's a better format than Commoner. So we'll see. I want to ask you, I like to chuckle at that. What is the biggest changes you've seen from the Calling series in 2021 to say Leal or Worlds a full year later? And I've got a few things I want you to ask on. First player skill. What's the biggest change you've seen in the past 12 months in player skill?
Yeah, so obviously they're better. Like any high level year long pro circuit is going to do that. It's going to make if you could consider the people that show up to the Pro 2 and the World Championships the 1%, it's going to make them better because they are competing in the environment more and they get comfortable with it and they understand what it takes to be there. Outside of that, to answer your question, people are getting better, but outside of that, I would also attribute it to Kalashar and online play. I think that's a ridiculous resource for the game, and it's made the good players better. But I think that the online resource of being able to play Flesh and Blood Demand has made the average player much better.
Mm-hmm. I think players are adapting quicker to what defines a meta. I'd be really interested to see us go back to the Tales of Aria meta and the Lightning Briar meta and see how quickly people react to that meta now because of all the things Brendan said, tools available, just players getting better and honing their skills. So I would be really interested to see, would we have the same sort of latency and lag and players responding to that meta game than we would now. And I think that is a big move on that players have had this past 12 months, is that people adapt quickly. They understand metas a lot more easily than they used to. And I think that's not just a result of the metas themselves, it's actually a result of the player's skill. What about the events themselves, Brendan?
I mean, the events are more challenging, right? Like, I feel like pre-2022, if I went to a major event, like a calling, I would get a couple freebie rounds, maybe one at least, right? One freebie, one guy who just shows up because he's there with his friends, or it's just not that tuned in, is making a lot of mistakes, and I just get my free round. That seems pretty rare nowadays, to be honest. It feels like you got to work for a lot of your wins, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think it's indicative of the player skill increase we talked about.
Yeah. I took this more from like the events, I think, being run themselves, but we already talked about this. You talked about it with the events haven't really changed much, which is great. I think that's good from like a benchmark standpoint. Like you said, PT1, the callings last year in Orlando at Nationals, I thought those events were great. They felt good to be at these venues, the community aspect, everything. I just hope that actually continues and improves in 2023. We move on from Lille and Worlds, etc. What about the metagames? How have you found the metagames have changed in the past 12 months? We've gone through, 4 or 5 different metagames over the past 12 months?
Yeah, honestly, something that I wasn't aware of while it was happening, and I just kind of missed it, but it was that the Prism was actually the problem all along. Like, I thought that Prism was a healthy thing to have in the meta because it kept these stupid fatigue decks out of the game, right? It was a silver bullet against them. But turns out you take out Prism, and like those fatigue decks actually don't do well, and we end up in this sort of mid-rangey format. And I think there's a healthy amount of aggro, there's a very healthy amount of mid-range, and there is still control decks as well. So yeah, I'm pretty surprised that ultimately in 2022 Prism was just the problem the whole time.
Yeah, was Prism the problem in the Tales of Aria meta?
Was Prism the Tales? Well, like. I don't know. That's tough. Maybe, right? Maybe
it did win New Zealand Nationals. I agree with you, but on like the flip side, I think Fi was like the most important hero that we've had in probably in Flesh and Blood, to be honest. For that reason, I think it's an aggro deck that's approachable. It has linear game plans. It's really hard to fatigue, like you just talked about. I think that is actually on the flip side of Prism being Living Legend. I think the introduction of Fi has really helped evolve these metagames as well and take us into a direction that if Prism being Living Legend was raised concerns about fatigue and things like you said, I think Fi was the solution to those potential metagames, which I think is cool. What about the game itself, Brendan? Anything past 12 months, biggest changes?
The game is lower variance than it was before, which is good for pro players, but this goes back to when we were kind of ranting about Starvo. But I think that comes at the cost of the game potentially being a little bit boring for normal players. Like, it does feel, I actually feel less engaged with Flesh and Blood now, even though it has sort of become everything that I asked for. Like, wizard decks are good. These mid-range decks are very playable. People are not fatiguing. There's no super BS aggro deck per se. Like, it's everything I asked for. But maybe I was wrong, maybe it is fun to have a bit more variance. I don't know. I would love to compete in this meta. Like, this is absolutely the kind of meta I'd like to compete in, but I don't feel super, how do I say this? I don't feel the desire to go and play like Armories every week right now. I know you have played since Dynasty, but let's just say pre-Dynasty.
Yeah.
to have it fair. I don't feel that in this kind of meta.
Yeah, I felt the same pre-Dynasty, to be honest, and all the things you kind of said, I echo a lot of it. The games are actually more unique, I think, like you talked about, but the turns tend to feel fairly similar, and this kind of the emergence of what is this value kind of way of playing and looking at deck building, that's happened because that is a good way to look at it in this format post Prism. That is just the truth of it. That's, heap praise on Michael Hamilton. He's the best player in the world, and the way he looked at the game to bring Icelanders to US Nationals was really unique, right? But I think that's a symptom of what happens post Prism and the way that the game should unfold. I kind of agree. The variance went I guess like a bit of a curve. Like we had a lot of low variance during Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, then I think more variance came into the game with Monarch, etc., Tails, and then it really came back down the other side, which I think is a good balancing. But yeah, the game has changed a lot. And I actually think Dynasty, though, has been a really positive thing for that, because it's continued with some of the good threads that we saw in the Uprising meta, I think, in terms of, a bit lower variance. There's really interesting ways to play the game. Turns are quite unique, but it removes some of the stuff that I thought was a bit less engaging, like you say. And I think that's Dynasty is a good way forward. I'm excited to see what Outsiders brings for that as well.
Yeah, it's a tough one to really talk about in a way, because I don't really want it to go back to that. No,
neither.
Just baloney of those Briar metas, and then
it's not good for the game.
No, I think and especially as as a competitive player and someone that's spending money to travel these events, and this is like part of kind of what they do. That sucked. I thought that the meta at Pro Tour Lille was garbage. Absolutely just almost embarrassingly bad for the game. But yeah, I feel like the current state of the game could be spiced up a little bit. Not too much, please. Not too much, please.
Well, that's what I think Dynasty is, to be honest with you. And I think we saw a little bit, Worlds meta felt a little bit the same in Classic Constructors, to be honest. But I think Dynasty's been good for the game. And I think somewhere between the Uprising meta and the Tales of Aria meta is where I'd love us to live. Because I do agree with you. We're kind of running a bit short on time. We've got another few sections, but I'm just going to cherry pick some questions that I think are my favorite questions from this kind of 2022 year in review. So on learnings and I guess level ups this year, Brennan, what's been your biggest learning experience personally as a player through 2022?
Yeah, it's that I tweak decks. I talk a lot of ish about people who are deck tweakers and not deck builders, because I think it's a cop out, right? I think that it's just you're copping out because you don't want to actually dive deep into the game, right? And deck builders are deck tweakers. That's the argument. But I think I found over this year that, the sort of symbiotic relationship that me and Sasha had was very productive. And honestly, he would come up with some garbage, and eventually we would get it to something that was playable, and then I would do a lot of tweaking, and then it was just it was a very good. So I guess I'm just that person, and I just accept that, and I just have to work with actual deck builders, people that want to think about different brews for 10 hours a day or whatever, because that's just not me. I don't know. I'm thinking about individual cards. I'm like, ooh, what about full deck bolt?
Yeah, I definitely fall more on the side of deck building. That's for sure. Definitely something that I think is more. It does take up a lot of time, though, which I will say. I will say that the thought processes can be frustrating, and it is very distracting and not very productive a lot of the time. Biggest learning for me, I think, just preparation and putting in time to master game plans versus understanding a format and depth. That was a really big sort of level up for me, I think, as a player. Trying to make a meta call versus trying to understand what a meta will be and just build the deck for that, I think was a big change. It's I had a little analogy. It's like being a triathlete versus being a specialist athlete. I think maybe you're good at a few different disciplines, but is that going to be the way that you're not going into play three different decks when it comes to the Pro Tour or Worlds or whatever, in one format. You're going to play one deck in a format. I think you need to be able to master that deck to have good success.
Well, I think we could probably talk about, just quickly.
Of course.
One of our biggest mistakes, Pro Tour number 2, and I would attribute this to probably the main reason for our failure was actually not valuing reps on a deck enough. we just didn't get to practice with the deck enough, and that's so huge. I think it's big enough it's like a big enough factor that I think that there's like should be sort of a specific time leading up to the tournament at specific date where it's just like if you are not 100% sure in what deck you're playing, you should just automatically audible to like a top meta deck and just practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I want to ask if there's one level up that you wish you could share with all of the Arsenal Pass listeners and they would go and learn it today, what would that level up be?
It's not relevant anymore, technically, but always expect Prism. This can be extrapolated to other heroes in the future here, but it just never made any sense. Like Prism always looked garbage in these metas, but people would play it. And you just need to realize when there's a hero like Prism, it looks a bit anime-esque. It's got a fun game plan. It plays non-interactive games. It's kind of easy at like a very base level, but
very powerful.
Yes, very powerful on the floor. Like people are just going to play that deck. They just love that deck. I mean, Flesh and Blood is a hero-centric format. It's a role-playing-esque kind of game. And even at the highest level, people are going to make that decision. It's like, I just play Prism. So no matter what the meta looks like, people are going to bring decks like that, which is fine. But if you're on the other side of that role playing and you're just like a Kano purist and you're like, I'm going to bring Kano, it doesn't make any sense to bring Prism. Just recalibrate and understand that people are people and they're going to play the decks they like.
I think you can extrapolate that learning to just be a bit more simplistic in your metagame evaluation than I think.
Level 1. You don't metagame yourself. God dang, we did that so much.
Well, you did that a few times by playing Bravo. But I think mine I come back to playing both sides of the table. It's just the one thing that I see time and time again. People with efficiency of playing both sides of the table. And what I mean by that is understanding what their opponent's going to do and what they're trying to do in a matchup. They keep getting the results. And it never fails to be like, I look at a game and go, well, the game is really tight, but one player was playing both sides of the table and the other player was doing that less so. And I think that is something that has continued to be a skill that if players can develop it, they're going to see success in this game. So I'm sure we'll dive more into that in 2023. We've talked about it in a few pods in 2022. Let's move on to some things about Arsenal Pass quickly. Brendan, just any kind of... How have you found being a content creator for a full year? This is the first full year of being a content creator. You also dived into the casting world. What have been your personal highlights from this time?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that... like we talked about this actually recently. I don't know if it was on a Patreon pod or what, but I feel like when I listen to content creators, when I consume content, there's like this disconnect between how much the content creator benefits from the viewer, listener, person's attention and like what that does. And I think that, I don't know, like I just feel like there was not a lot of transparency for how awesome like it is. Like it's freaking, it's great. Like we go to the Pro Tour, you got like everybody, people who listen to this, you come up and the things you say to us, like you really can't understand how much that means. It's a bizarre human experience, right? Without Arsenal Pass, it's very likely I would have never experienced that in my entire life. So it's weird, right? Being able to travel and, people are kind to us. They'll take us out, they'll do these things. And then, we get the spoilers and we like the core of our work as well is getting on here and talking about things that we already want to talk about. It's just a very unusual and lucky lifestyle. And yeah, I want everybody I don't know. I just feel like content creators don't talk about that enough. It's just
That's
like
privilege.
Yeah, it's just, that's what it is. It's privilege. Because all I hear content creators talk about, and it's not going to be a rant, is like, oh, somebody said a mean thing to me on YouTube. Like, yes, that happens. It does. Like, that's just part of it. It's going to happen. But the negative to positive sort of...
the ratios, yeah. The
ratio
take the bad with
ridiculous.
the good.
Is ridiculously positive. Like there's almost nothing to complain about, and it's an incredibly blessed lifestyle. And I'm very appreciative to be able to experience it.
We are very privileged. That is very true. Yeah, I mean, just on the back of that, I think just the people that we've got to meet this year at these events has been the biggest highlight for me of doing a full year of Arsenal Pass. We've just had some amazing conversations at events. We've heard some amazing stories. We've met some of the coolest people, and it's all come about because of Arsenal Pass. So it's I'm looking forward to more in 2023, meeting more cool people, having more amazing conversations. getting a bit more flamed in some comments, I'm sure. But like you said, Brendan, we'll take the bad in with the good. I'm sure people want to hear though. What kind of content do you enjoy making the most, and also what does that mean for you in 2023 with Flesh and Blood content? What are your plans?
So let's talk about the content I don't enjoy making. So currently, the content I don't enjoy making is gameplay, but it's mostly because of a setup thing.
Logistical,
Yeah, logistical, like just had some issues with cameras and stuff. But I really enjoy the podcasts that are more freeform. So probably the mailbags are my favorite. Obviously, we can't do mailbag every
we
week.
can try.
But I like the philosophical kind of tangents that we are sometimes allowed to take, and I also like that command and cookout question. Like that was an absolute kind of disaster answer from us, right? It was not very concise, but that was us figuring it out on the fly, and that's the kind of convo Hayden and I would have by ourselves, like, I don't know, not live
all the time. So, in our testing sessions.
Or my favorite is before the podcast. Like when we're like, yeah, it's just
we're recording at 8 a.m. and then at 9 a.m. we hit record.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. That's what I enjoy doing. I love the podcast. I cannot fathom ever not doing the podcast. Like it's a very self-actualizing thing to I don't know, get positive benefit out of what basically is you're just having a convo with your friend. And yeah, that's not a big ask for me, and I can see myself doing this for a very, very long time.
Who you calling friend, buddy?
Yeah, guy.
Kidding. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy a lot of the content we've done this year. Deck techs and more in-depth sort of strategic content, I think, is what I really, really enjoy. And the plan is in 2023 to do more of that across myself and Brendan. And we will do some gameplay. Don't worry. As much as Brendan dislikes it, we're going to fix some logistical issues and we will do some gameplay. Don't worry about that. Any last questions I want to ask you, Brendan? I guess just the last one, I think this is really important, is expectations and feeling for organized play in 2023. Obviously, we kind of did a little bit of a brief discussion on it as soon as we heard the announcement, but it was pretty fresh at the time. Now that we know so far that we've got one PT, we've got World Championships, we've got these kind of blocked off seasons. How do you feel about organized play in 2023, and what are your expectations?
So I guess there's a few ways to answer this question. So how do I feel about organized play? I'm very, very interested to see how they handle the coverage aspect, actually. It's not because I moved to the casting role, but it's actually because the Channel Fireball contract is up. So that whole production is being handed off to someone else. Will the production go up? Will it go down? Will they still have an emphasis on it? Are they going to level it up? Et cetera, et cetera. I think that's really important for the game as a marketing piece. Like maybe this is just I'm an outlier, but if I'm going to play a game, if I pick up a new game, I enjoy seeing what the peak of that game looks like. And if there's coverage of a world championship and there's narratives and it's well done, like that makes me want to play that game. When it's just like, okay, I can play this game, I can get good, and it's sort of just an echo chamber and I just do it by myself, and that's not fun for me. So I think that Magic did that really well with all of their professional content in the past. And I think that Fab has emulated that, and I really, really hope they stick with it. And yeah, I'm most interested to see how they handle that, because CFB was sort of a one-stop shop for that, right? They just paid them, from what I understand, it would be like a sort of a lump sum for the contract, and CFB has sort of that system built up in terms of like how to run a production at a major tournament like that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good point. I think, like you say, it really is a marketing cost. Where does the most traffic for games go? It goes to generally the homepage for those games. If not, you're probably not doing it right. And I think LSS has this opportunity to continue to use these pro events in 2023 as massive ways to show off their sets, right? I think we didn't realize that in 2022. World Championships could have been a way to show off Dynasty in a massive way, and I think probably would have bumped sales for that, even given the set came out at the end of the year. But I think that's a massive opportunity in 2023. I'm really optimistic. I think that the idea to run one PT, double the prize pool, focus on callings, have the World Championships is a really good way to run OP in 2023. Whether they continue that into 2024, I don't think they necessarily have to. I think they can then change it up again. But I think for this event in particular, this year in particular, I think is a great way to do it, as they're starting to implement some improvements and feedback and things from 2022. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. I want to see more callings. I want to play in more callings. We'll see how that goes. But, we've said it time and time again. It'd be great to have a bit more info about that, but we'll see what happens. I'll continue to be optimistic about that, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even info about like one thing, like, oh, give us the dates faster, but it's like info about everything. It's like, who's doing the production? Who's casting it? It's
what's happening?
What's happening? Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, hopefully, they get that one down, because I feel like if you play Flesh and Blood professionally and you do put your time and your money and your emotional effort into it, I think that it's hard to take it seriously if they don't take it seriously enough to give you a good enough notice to facilitate that. Like we talked about this on the last podcast, but it doesn't feel like the Pro Tour when they're just like, oh, about a month before, there's like, okay, this is the date, which is not exactly what they do. But when it gets close to that, it's like, it's frustrating. So yeah, hopefully they fix it.
It's hard for all the aspects of building it up and marketing it, and there's so many different things that go into that as well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I do think as well, product roadmaps and timelines would be a great thing for LSS to explore. We talked about this idea of kitchen table fab needing more support, and I'm sure there's some products coming in 2023.
Yes.
Let's start hyping those up now. Let's start understanding what a product roadmap looks like. We know roughly the two sets. I think they could also do a better job of announcing, hey, set, code name is coming at this point in 2023. Here's some already early assets for, people get excited about, and they just keep reminding people having this kind of roadmap, I think, is something that Magic in particular used to do really well. I know Pokemon have done it really well in the past. I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, I don't want to take you on a tangent, but my biggest concern for Fab overall is actually kitchen table. I feel like it borderline doesn't exist at this point. Like, I just can't, I can't imagine like what would compel me to play Flesh and Blood at my kitchen table with like friends or family, unless I was teaching them the game. Like, you can play like sealed and stuff like that, and if you have a really good format, I guess it facilitates that. But outside of that, I feel like with the way Flesh and Blood works and the way these current formats are, there's not really a super fun way to engage with the game. I know everybody who plays UPF is like screaming in their freaking in their house by the right now. They're like, oh, you can play UPF. Yeah, sure. But they need to push that more and support it more, in my opinion. But kitchen table is going to be the backbone of this game, probably. So we need to figure out how to make that happen.
It could be PvE, right? But I mean, we've waited so long for this now, for any kind of announcement of PvE, other than
what happens
it's not
if it
ready.
Sucks, bro?
Yeah, it's not ready. And UPF could also be that way, but I think then there needs to be more support for UPF. There needs to be more driven content from LSS around UPF. There needs to be a bit more focus on the format itself if they want that to be the format, which I have no problem with. I think it's a great format, but again, there's issues there with things that aren't being done right now. So yeah, we'll see. I will ask you though, when was the times that you did play some kitchen table this year? Was it maybe Classic Battles? Was it maybe Monarch Blitz decks? I guess that was last year.
So I played the Classic Battles a couple times. But I didn't find it super engaging. Also, I think that Classic Battles was a massive failure, in my opinion, mostly because of the price point. I think that was not correct.
Yeah, I agree.
Please don't do that again. Blitz decks, I played them a little bit, to be honest. But my kitchen table experiences with Flesh and Blood and the good kitchen table experiences I have, and this could be tainted by nostalgia, have been with things like the Ira decks. I found that to be very enjoyable back when I played it. And Welcome to Race Sealed. I felt like that was a great sealed format that had a lot of replayability. So yeah, those are pretty much the highlights for me in terms of me playing kitchen table Flesh and Blood.
Yep. I would love to see a bit more events like Skirmish. We saw Skirmish. We saw the Welcome to Race Farewell events this year. Those events are great for a bit more of expanding on armories, and I think those are great for growing the game as well. So I'd love to see those. Anyway, we could go on for hours and hours, I'm sure. There's a lot of other things we didn't get to as well. If you are an Arsenal Pass Patreon at, I'll say, the Plunder Run tier, you can get access to all these notes. There's other stuff here which we might revisit in the future. I think we got through like half of these questions because I underestimated how long we'd spend talking about these. As always, we love to dive in and go on tangents. So if you do want to see those notes, they actually, you know what, they're all going to be available for January anyway. So if you are a Patreon, you'll see all these notes. They'll be available. Anyway, Brendan, that's kind of going to do it. Any last things you want to mention before we sign off for the year?
No, well, there is on February 19th, if you want to join us for the Austin Marathon, there is a 5K and half marathon available as well. Just the best way to get in contact, to be honest, if you want to link up with us, is just join the Arsenal Pass Patreon, which, like Hayden says, basically free at this point. Join on Discord, there's a channel for it in there. And a lot of us follow each other on this fitness app called Strava, which is really fun.
I just got it as well.
I saw you got it. I saw you post on your Instagram, and then I was like, "You freaking! Why are you not following me?"
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's totally a thing. It's actually a social app. That's like the fun part. Is it's a social app, but the only way you can engage with it is by doing hard things. So like you have to like exercise to like socialize, and it's really fun once you get a kind of group of friends or people you know on there, because I don't know, just it feels like a very healthy and organic way to sort of engage with social media. And yeah, they track a bunch of data too. That's like cool to reference. But follow me, Hayden, and if anybody wants to link up with us for that marathon, go ahead and join the Arsenal Pass Patreon. Again, it's February 19th. You don't have to run the full marathon, half and 5K available as well. Austin, Texas.
Cool. All right, that's going to do it for Arsenal Pass for 2022. A massive thank you to all our Arsenal Pass listeners, our patrons. And we just want to say, wish you all a happy new year. We'll see you in 2023. If you want to follow us on Twitter, Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. Of course, over on YouTube, we've got a few more deck techs and things coming up over the next couple of weeks in the lead up to ProQuest season, which you can check out. Until next time, Brendan, we will see you in 2023.
See you.